Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to the 12th Annual Women of Valor. I'm Todd Salovey, the Artistic Director of the Lipinski Family's San Diego Jewish Arts Festival.
And my name is Ali Viterbi, and I'm the Associate Artistic Director of the festival, as well as the Director and co-writer of Women of Valor, along with writers Todd Salovey, Leah Salovey, Sarah Price Keating, and J-Fest Associate Producer Becca Myers.
It is our honor to share this year's selected Women of Valor. Beloved klezmer musician Elizabeth Schwartz, sleep researcher and professor of psychology Sonia Ancoli-Israel, Jewish Federation's Director of Philanthropy Jodie Graber, and Holocaust survivor Francheska Gelbart.
This year's inspiring honorees give us hope for a vibrant and meaningful Jewish future. Tonight, we honor Dr. Sonia Ancoli-Israel. Thank you so much for watching, and please enjoy A Woman of Valor.
A woman of valor, who shall find?
She is more precious than pearls.
She seeks out wool and flax and cheerfully does the work of her hands.
She is like trading ships, bringing food from afar.
She gets up while it is still night to provide for her household.
She invests herself with strength, and her arms are powerful.
She opens up her hands to the poor and reaches out to the needy.
Eshet Chayil Niimsa, a woman of valor, who shall find? For me, everything surrounds sleep. When someone doesn't sleep well, they can't concentrate, they don't do as well in school or at work, they start having interpersonal problems, health consequences. Sleep touches everything. It's interesting. There is a tremendous amount of information written about sleep in the Torah and Talmud. I recently wrote this paper on what the Jewish tradition has to say about sleep. As scientists, we consider our discoveries to be landmarks. But all the things that we think we've learned about sleep is already in the Torah. It's amazing. It's pretty much all there. I have over 525 publications, but that one was the most fun to write. Judaism is extremely important to me. I find great comfort being in shul. There's something about being with my community that centers me. My parents were not religious at all. They were Holocaust survivors. And you know, survivors go in two directions. They're either very religious or they're totally secular. My parents were totally secular. But somehow I always felt it. I remember being with my husband, Andy, in Toronto once, and we walked by a train of not cattle cars, but storage cars. And I said, "Look at that. What do you see?" And he said, "A train." I see the Jews being carried away. Growing up as a second generation, I just look at life very differently. Andy and I met when my dad was very ill. He had a glioblastoma brain tumor and he went into the hospital as an emergency. And Andy was the medical student on his case. When my dad was transferred to a private room, Andy was no longer on his case. But he liked my parents so much that he would come visit. I often teased Andy that he fell in love with my parents before he fell in love with me. I can't say we really started dating. I think we may have gone out to dinner or something, but mostly he sat in my father's room at the hospital with me and kept me company. He just sat with me. After my father died, it took me quite a while to figure out if I really loved him or I was just grateful to him for all his support. Well, I figured it out, obviously. After I did my PhD in psychology, I moved to San Diego because Andy and I figured we need to live in the same city to figure out if this was real or not. So I went looking for a job and I went to visit the UCSD VA. And they said to me, "We don't have any money, but we have a desk and a phone. Write a grant. If you get funded, there you go." And right around that time, the National Institute for Mental Health came out with a request for applications on sleep and aging. I wrote a grant, it got funded, and the rest is history. One line of my sleep research was in rhythms and fatigue and cancer. In one of the studies I did, we increased light exposure for breast cancer patients throughout their 4 cycles of chemotherapy. We found that we actually kept their fatigue from getting worse. The other line of my research was in Alzheimer's. It turns out that sleep apnea increases the risk of dementia. So I decided to look at what happens if you treat the apnea. What will that do to cognition? I studied people with mild to moderate dementia still living at home, and I found that when we improve sleep, we improve the apnea, and there was some improvement in cognition. For me, my work has always been about improving quality of life in people by improving their sleep. It's sort of ironic, you know, because I spent 40 years studying Alzheimer's and all of a sudden I had to switch hats from the clinician researcher to caregiver. In 2012, Andy was diagnosed with PCA, posterior cortical atrophy, which is a form of Alzheimer's disease. The difference is that the deterioration is in the back of the brain, which means the whole visual system is affected. So although there was nothing wrong with his eyes, the brain did not understand what the eyes were seeing. And sometimes he would look right at me and I could tell he couldn't see me. And yet other times he could. Andy was an amazing man. We were married 41 years and we were very much in love. We always held hands wherever we went. We loved to dance. We were actually really good dancers. You know, I'm the one that was traveling all the time for work, and he helped take care of the kids, helped in the house. The kids would always say it was Dad's rules when I was away. They never told me what Dad's rules were. But it was a real equal marriage. We loved to travel together. And when he was diagnosed, we continued to travel like crazy. That's when we really started going crazy. We would do 2 to 3 major trips a year until I'd say the last 2 years. And then it just got too hard. But even at the point when it was getting hard, he kept asking me, "Where are we going next?" So it was devastating when he got diagnosed. He had to stop working, and he loved his patients. He loved his work. I retired when he was diagnosed because I figured we didn't know how much time we would have, but I wanted to make the most of it. But I kept on that researcher hat. There's a PCA group based in London, and we have a Facebook group. And on this Facebook group, there were all kinds of questions. You know, my wife isn't sleeping and this and that. And I would pipe in with my professional hat. I mean, they started saying, Sonia, what do you suggest? One time I happened to be in London for a meeting right when they were having their caregiver group. So I went. I knew a lot of the professionals through my working in the field, but I'm there as a caregiver, right? And at one point, the doctor who's running it looks at me and says, Sonia, do you mind talking to us about sleep and Alzheimer's? Sure, let me just switch hats. I'll tell you an interesting story. So at the point that we had hospice come to help with Andy, his sleep was incredibly disturbed. He was up a lot of the night, and I didn't have help at night at that point. I was so sleep deprived. So I'm talking to the hospice nurse, and she said, we have a special cream that we make that will help with his agitation and might help him sleep better. It's a combination of Ativan, Haldol, and Benadryl. Now, these are the 3 drugs that I spent my entire career saying, do not ever use these drugs. These should not be used in an older person, period. I mean, I was like on a soapbox about this stuff. So literally my mouth dropped. Are you kidding? And I literally stopped mid-sentence and I said, you know what? I'm going to put my caregiver hat back on and take off my professional hat. This is hospice. The goals here are very different. I'm going to give it a try. But it was like, which hat? The last year was really hard. And the last 6 months were a nightmare. But even when I would cry out of frustration and sadness, Andy would put his arms around me. Although he had no idea what was going on, he just knew I was unhappy and wanted to comfort me. How did I deal with it? I just lived. At first it was day to day, and then it was hour by hour, literally just an hour at a time. There were some hours that were good and some hours that were really bad. And when you made it through 1 hour, you sort of went on to the next. I think I really got that strength from my mother. She had been dealt some serious blows in her life, being in the Shoah, in the labor camps, leaving her parents behind, and then losing my father, young, who was absolutely the love of her life. They would always hold hands too. I mean, it's such a parallel to Andy and I. The love of my life was ill and I nursed him, and I lost him too. But she managed to keep going. A tenet of Judaism is life comes first, and she never gave up. Her will to live always came first. But in the end, it was time. Andy really had no quality of life left. Nothing. Even the grandchildren no longer brought him any joy. It was just noise to him. So it was time. And I have to say, as much as I miss him, there's a lot of relief. It was hard. I would do it again in a heartbeat, but it was hard. After Andy died, a lot of people said to me, "You are such a hero for what you did," but I never thought twice about it. Of course it's what I would do. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take care of him. I wanted to make his life as comfortable as possible for as long as possible. I never thought of being selfless. It's what you do for someone you love. And I loved him. It's what my mother did too. That was part of her legacy. And mine. Another bit of my legacy that I'm most proud of are the 2 Shoah memorials that I built at the JCC in Bethel. At the JCC, my goal in that memorial was to have a place where I could have my grandparents, my family's names, because there are no graves. And I wanted a place with the name of the righteous Gentiles who saved the survivors in the San Diego community. I love that the memorial is right next to the preschool, and the little kids run through there. They have no idea what it is, but it just shows how we survived. We survived. I'm most proud of my children. Of course, they're good people. They're wonderful parents. I think Andy and I did a good job. And knowing that my grandchildren are growing up in homes full of love and caring, full of happiness, full of Yiddishkeit, that's just the best. And professionally, I'm very proud of what I achieved. I've had an impact on the field and I've helped people. And what could be more important than that? I'm most proud of my students who have become professionals and major influences of their own in the field. Oh, and I wrote a book. That was fun. It's called All I Want is a Good Night's Sleep. And I'm proud that it helped many people get a good night's sleep. Looking forward, I'm really excited to get back to travel. Next year, I have so many trips planned. I'm barely going to be home. I'm going to Churchill to see the beluga whales, and Uganda and Rwanda to see gorillas. I'm going to India and Spain and the Netherlands to go see the tulips blooming, Borneo to see orangutans, and then Tanzania to see the Great Migration, and Madagascar to look for lemurs. I have this travel blog, journeyswithsonia.com. I love photography. I love trying to capture people's smiles. I love capturing colors and smells and tastes. You know, now that I'm not writing too many scientific papers and grants, all that writing went into my blog. This last year with the pandemic was doubly unusual because at first I was dealing with Andy, and then I was dealing with his death. And for me, I was grateful that I was stuck at home, because had I not been, as soon as my shloshim was over, I would have been on a plane out of here just to get away. And I never would have had the time to deal with the whole thing. I miss Andy every second of every day. I miss holding his hand. I miss dancing around the house with him. At night, I reach for him, but he's not there. I try to feel his arms around me. I picture his smile and the twinkle in his eyes. I talk to him all the time. Sometimes I yell at him for leaving me. But I'm grateful for the pandemic because I had to learn to be alone, and I learned that I can do it. That's a big deal. It's day-to-day kind of things. It's learning how to cook, for one, learning how to eat alone, learning how to sleep alone. Last Wednesday was the first time I got to say Kaddish for Andy in shul in person. And I swear to God, I started crying. I had to really hold myself. It was so emotional to be back there and to be at the Torah after all this time. Wow. I learned I can do it. I can survive, and I'll be okay. I am okay.
You tell me, because when I try to give advice to my daughter, I just get yelled at.
Women today are different than my generation. It was very difficult. Women today manage career, children, husband.
What is the most important thing in your life? Your kids? Your husband or wife? Your job? There is room for all of them, but they do also conflict with one another. Set your priorities.
It's easy to feel intimidated, especially as a young woman, but channel your inner strength and know that your voice needs to be heard.
You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to be the best at anything. You just need to be the best at being you. You have to love yourself like you're your own mother.
In Leviticus, it says, "Thou shalt not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." And that is my advice in all of life.
For your children, bake the cookie when they come home from school. They have the cookie and a glass of milk and served by mother. That's important.
And choose your battles. That was my advice always to my kids in bringing up theirs. Some things are important to fight for, and some things aren't.
I sometimes think that we don't listen enough, and we absolutely should to younger voices. They've got some incredible creative ideas, and I want to hear more.